there comes a quiet moment in life when you begin to see clearly, not through the noise of others, not through the need for approval, but through stillness. And in that stillness, you realize something uncomfortable. You have been treating yourself as an option. Stop seeking validation from the outside world, as if it holds the authority to define who you are. Notice how often the mind looks outward, searching for approval in people's reactions, their words, their attention, their silence. It becomes a habit so subtle that you may not even question it anymore. A message is sent and you wait. A post is shared and you check. An effort is made and you hope it is seen. And in all of this waiting, your sense of worth quietly becomes tied to something unstable. The problem is not that validation exists. The problem is dependence on it. When your inner state rises and falls based on how others respond to you, you lose your center. You become like a leaf in the wind, moving in whichever direction approval or rejection pushes you. One moment you feel enough, the next moment you feel lacking. Not because anything within you has changed, but because something outside you has shifted. Look closely and you will see how exhausting this is. To constantly measure yourself through other people's eyes requires endless effort. You begin to adjust your behavior, your words, even your personality, just to fit into expectations that are not your own. Slowly, without realizing it, you move further away from your natural state. You stop asking, "Is this true to me?" And instead ask, "Will this be accepted?" There is a quiet loss in that. A loss of authenticity. A loss of inner stability. Because no matter how much validation you receive, it never feels complete. It fades quickly. It demands more. What satisfied you yesterday is not enough today. And so the cycle continues, keeping you dependent, keeping you restless. Understand this clearly. External validation is unpredictable. People are inconsistent. Their opinions change. Their attention shifts. Their priorities move. If you build your sense of self on something so unstable, you will always feel uncertain. You will always feel like something is missing, like something needs to be fixed, like you are one step away from being enough. But your worth was never meant to be negotiated in the first place. It does not increase when someone praises you, and it does not decrease when someone overlooks you. It remains constant, untouched by opinions, untouched by recognition. The moment you begin to see this, even slightly, a different kind of strength starts to form within you. You begin to act not for approval, but from alignment. Your choices become quieter, but more grounded. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself to everyone. You no longer chase reactions. You observe them, but you are not controlled by them. There is a subtle shift from seeking to knowing. This does not mean you stop caring completely about others. It means you stop depending on them to tell you who you are. You listen, but you do not surrender your self-definition. You receive feedback, but you do not let it shape your core. There is a boundary that forms, not out of resistance, but out of understanding. And in that understanding, there is space. Space to be as you are without constant adjustment. Space to move without fear of judgment controlling every step. Space to exist without the pressure of being approved at all times. The need for validation will still arise at times. This is natural. But instead of immediately following it, you begin to notice it. You pause. You question it. And slowly, the grip it has on you weakens. Not because you forced it to disappear, but because you no longer feed it in the same way. What replaces It is not loud confidence or arrogance, but something much quieter, a steady sense of self that does not need to announce itself, a presence that does not need to prove itself, a knowing that remains even when no one is watching, even when no one is responding, even when no one is validating. Self-value is often misunderstood because the mind quickly labels it as pride or ego. But there is a clear difference between the two, and if you do not see this difference, you will continue to shrink yourself in situations where you should stand firm. Ego is loud, reactive, and dependent. It needs to be seen, it needs to be praised, it needs to feel superior. But true self-value is quiet. It does not compare, it does not compete, and it does not seek to prove anything to anyone. When you begin to understand your value, it does not come with noise or display. It comes with clarity, a simple, grounded awareness of who you are and what you bring into this world. You no longer need to exaggerate your strengths or hide your weaknesses. You see both clearly and honestly without distortion. And in that honesty, there is stability. Many people fear stepping into their worth because they have been taught that it is wrong to think highly of themselves. They confuse self-respect with arrogance, and so they hold themselves back. They speak less than they want to. They accept less than they deserve, and they tolerate behavior that does not align with their inner truth. Not because they do not feel it, but because they are afraid of how it will be perceived. But clarity does not ask for permission. When you know your value, you do not need others to agree with it. You do not need to convince anyone of it. You simply live in alignment with it. This alignment shows in the way you carry yourself, in the decisions you make, and in the boundaries you set without hesitation or guilt. Ego tries to elevate itself by lowering others. It looks for comparison as a way to feel significant. It says, I am better than you, or I must prove that I am more. But true self-value has no interest in this. It understands that worth is not a competition. It does not rise by pushing others down. It remains steady, regardless of who stands beside it. This is why self-value feels calm. There is no urgency in it, no rush to impress, no need to dominate conversations, no desire to constantly showcase achievements. It does not need validation, because it is already rooted within. Even in silence, it remains intact. When you operate from ego, you are easily shaken. Criticism feels like an attack. Rejection feels like a loss of identity. You react quickly because your sense of self is fragile. But when you operate from clarity, there is space between you and the reaction. You listen, you observe, but you do not collapse under every opinion. You remain centered. There is also a deeper honesty that comes with knowing your value. You stop pretending to be what you are not. You stop saying yes when everything within you is saying no. You stop staying in places where you feel unseen or unappreciated. Not because you are trying to prove something, but because it no longer aligns with what you understand about yourself. This understanding changes the way you interact with the world. You become more selective, not out of judgment, but out of awareness. You recognize where your energy is respected and where it is not. You give freely where there is mutual appreciation, and you withdraw quietly where there is none. At the same time, self-value does not make you rigid or closed. It allows you to remain open, but not vulnerable to disrespect. It allows you to be kind, but not at the cost of your dignity. It allows you to engage, but without losing yourself in the process. There is a simplicity in this state. You no longer overthink every action or decision. You move with a sense of inner agreement. And even when things do not go as expected, your foundation remains stable because it was never built on external approval. This is what makes self-value powerful. It is not something you declare loudly, but something you live consistently. It is not something you demand from others, but something that naturally shapes how others respond to you. Setting boundaries often brings an immediate sense of discomfort, not because something is wrong, but because you are no longer moving in the familiar pattern of pleasing others at your own expense. For a long time, you may have been saying yes when you meant no, allowing behaviors that did not sit well within you, simply to maintain harmony or avoid conflict. This pattern becomes so normal that the moment you begin to change it, guilt appears. That guilt is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is the sign that you are doing something different. When you begin to set boundaries, you are not rejecting others. You are recognizing your own limits. You are becoming aware that your time, your energy, and your emotional space are not infinite resources. If you give them without awareness, you will eventually feel drained, resentful, and disconnected from yourself. Notice how often you override your own needs just to keep others comfortable. You stay longer than you should. You listen when you have no energy left. You agree to things that do not align with you. And in those moments, something within you becomes quieter. Not because it disappears, but because it is being ignored repeatedly. Boundaries bring that inner voice back into awareness. They are not walls meant to isolate you from the world. They are guidelines that show others how to interact with you in a way that respects your space. Without them, people will often take as much as you are willing to give, not always out of intention, but because no limit has been communicated. When you do not set boundaries, you teach others that your limits can be crossed, not through words, but through repeated behavior. And over time, this creates a pattern where your needs are placed second or not considered at all. The moment you begin to shift this, there may be resistance. People who were used to having unrestricted access to you may not understand the change. They may question it, react to it, or even try to make you feel guilty for it. This is where your clarity becomes important. If your boundaries depend on others' approval, they will not hold. Setting a boundary is not about controlling someone else's behavior. It is about choosing your response. It is about deciding what you will accept and what you will no longer allow into your space. This requires honesty, first with yourself and then with others. There is a quiet strength in saying no without over-explaining. You do not need long justifications for protecting your energy. The need to explain often comes from a desire to be understood and accepted. But boundaries are not negotiations. They are decisions. At first, it may feel uncomfortable to be this direct. You may feel the urge to soften your words, to add extra explanations, or to go back on your decision, just to ease the tension. But each time you stand firm, even in discomfort, you reinforce a new pattern within yourself. Over time, this discomfort begins to fade. What once felt difficult becomes natural. You begin to recognize your limits more quickly, and you respond to them without hesitation. There is less internal conflict because you are no longer divided between what you feel and what you do. Boundaries also bring clarity to your relationships. They reveal who respects your space and who only values you when you are available without limits. This is not something you need to force or analyze deeply. It becomes visible through simple observation. You begin to notice who listens when you say no and who pushes against it, who understands your need for space and who takes it personally. These observations are not meant to create judgment, but awareness. From that awareness, your interactions naturally change. You invest your energy where it is respected, and you withdraw it where it is not. Not out of anger, not out of punishment, but out of self-respect. There is a balance that forms within you. You remain open, but not unprotected. You remain giving, but not depleted. You remain present, but not at the cost of losing yourself. And in that balance, something stabilizes. You no longer feel the constant pressure to meet every expectation placed on you. You no longer feel responsible for everyone's comfort at the expense of your own. What remains is a quieter way of relating to the world, where your presence is not taken for granted and your energy is no longer given without awareness. There is a subtle way in which a person begins to abandon themselves, and it rarely happens all at once. It happens in small, almost invisible moments. Moments where you ignore what you feel, where you silence your inner voice, where you choose someone else's comfort over your own truth. At first, it seems harmless. You tell yourself it is just this one time, just this one situation. But over time, these moments accumulate and a pattern begins to form. You start to disconnect from yourself. You may still function, still show up, still play your roles in life, but something within you feels distant. Not because it has disappeared, but because it has been pushed aside too many times. Each time you ignore what you know deep inside, you create a gap between who you are and how you are living. This gap is where discomfort begins. It shows up as restlessness, as frustration without a clear cause, as a quiet sense that something is not right. You may try to fix it externally by changing people, changing environments, or seeking new distractions. But the source is not outside. It is in the repeated decision to move against yourself. When you abandon yourself, you teach others how to treat you, not through words, but through your actions. If you consistently ignore your own needs, others will learn to ignore them too. If you accept what does not feel right, others will assume it is acceptable. This is not always intentional on their part, but it becomes the dynamic. There is also a deeper cost. The more you abandon yourself, the harder it becomes to trust yourself. You begin to question your own feelings, your own instincts, your own sense of what is right or wrong for you. Doubt replaces clarity. Hesitation replaces confidence. You look outward for answers because you no longer feel grounded within. And yet, even in this state, the inner voice does not disappear. It becomes quieter, but it remains present. It shows up in moments of stillness, in brief flashes of awareness, in that feeling that something is being compromised. The question is not whether this voice exists, but whether you are willing to listen to it. Listening requires courage, because once you acknowledge what you truly feel, you can no longer pretend that everything is fine. You are faced with the choice to act differently. And this is where many people hesitate, because acting differently may disrupt what is familiar. It may mean disappointing others. It may mean stepping away from situations you have tolerated for a long time. It may mean facing uncertainty, but continuing to abandon yourself also has a cost. A quieter cost, but a deeper one. it erodes your sense of self over time. It creates a life that may look acceptable on the outside, but feels misaligned on the inside. Returning to yourself does not require a dramatic change. It begins with small decisions, noticing when something does not feel right and not immediately dismissing it. Allowing your feelings to exist without judging them. Giving yourself permission to consider your own needs as valid. At first, this may feel unfamiliar. You may feel resistance, even guilt, because you are breaking a pattern that has been repeated for a long time. But with each moment you choose to listen instead of ignore, something begins to shift. You start to rebuild trust within yourself. This trust is not created through words or affirmations, but through action. Through consistently showing yourself that what you feel matters, that your inner voice is worth paying attention to, that your experience is valid. Over time, this creates a different kind of stability. You no longer feel as easily pulled in different directions by external demands or expectations. There is a center within you that remains steady even when circumstances change. You become more honest in your interactions, not harsh, not reactive, but clear. You no longer agree to things that go against your inner sense just to maintain peace. You no longer stay silent when something needs to be acknowledged. This does not mean everything becomes easy. There will still be moments of uncertainty, moments where you question your decisions. But the difference is that you are no longer turning away from yourself in those moments. You remain with yourself. And in that presence, there is a quiet strength, a sense that even if things are not perfect, you are no longer divided within. There is a shift that happens when you stop waiting to be chosen and begin to choose for yourself. At first, it is almost uncomfortable because you have spent so much time placing others in the position of decision maker. You wait for their attention, their approval, their commitment, their clarity. And while you are waiting, your life remains on pause, tied to outcomes you cannot control. This waiting creates a subtle imbalance. It places your worth in someone else's hands. It gives them the power to define whether you feel valued or not. And without realizing it, you begin to adapt yourself to fit what you think they want, hoping that this will increase your chances of being chosen. But when you begin to see clearly, you recognize something important. Choosing is not something reserved for others. It is something you have always had the ability to do, but perhaps did not fully use. To choose means to take responsibility for your direction. It means to stop asking, will they pick me? And instead ask, does this align with me? This question changes everything because it shifts the focus from external validation to internal clarity. When you live in a state of waiting, you become passive. You accept what comes, even if it does not fully meet your needs. You tolerate inconsistency, hoping it will turn into stability. You overlook red flags, convincing yourself that things will improve. All of this happens because you are more focused on being chosen than on choosing wisely. But when you step into the role of the chooser, your awareness sharpens. You begin to observe more closely, not just what people say, but how they act. Not just how something looks on the surface, but how it feels beneath it. You become less impressed by words and more attentive to patterns. This awareness naturally leads to selectivity, not as a form of rejection, but as a form of self-respect. You no longer feel the need to accept everything that is offered to you. You understand that not every opportunity Not every connection, not every situation is meant for you. There is also a deeper sense of calm that comes with choosing. Because instead of constantly reacting to what others do or do not do, you are grounded in your own decisions. You are not waiting for someone to decide your place in their life. You are deciding who has a place in yours. This does not mean you control everything. Life remains uncertain. People remain unpredictable. But your role within that uncertainty changes. You are no longer at the mercy of it. You are participating in it with awareness. Choosing also requires honesty. It asks you to be real with yourself about what you want, what you need, and what you are no longer willing to accept. This can be challenging because it removes the comfort of illusion. You can no longer tell yourself that something is enough when you know it is not. There may be moments where choosing means walking away, not because something is completely broken, but because it does not align with the standard you have set for yourself. These moments can feel difficult because they involve letting go of familiarity, but they also create space for something more aligned to enter. At times, choosing yourself may feel like you are losing something, a connection, an opportunity, a possibility. But what you are actually doing is creating a boundary between what supports your growth and what limits it. Over time, this practice builds a quiet confidence, not the kind that seeks attention, but the kind that remains steady, regardless of external circumstances. You trust your decisions more because they come from a place of awareness rather than need. You begin to notice that you are less affected by rejection, not because it no longer happens, but because it no longer defines you. If something does not work out, you do not immediately assume that something is wrong with you. You simply recognize that it was not aligned. This way of living creates a different experience, one where you are not constantly chasing, not constantly adjusting, not constantly waiting. You move with intention. You engage with clarity. You step forward because you choose to, not because you are hoping to be chosen. And in that shift, your presence changes. It becomes more grounded, more certain, more self-directed. Not forceful, not rigid, but clear in a way that does not require explanation. In the end, all of this returns to one simple truth. You cannot build a meaningful life while standing outside of yourself. As long as you seek validation, you will feel uncertain. As long as you doubt your value, you will shrink. As long as you avoid setting boundaries, you will feel drained. As long as you abandon yourself, you will feel divided. As long as you wait to be chosen, you will feel powerless. But the moment you turn inward and stand with yourself, something shifts, not loudly, not suddenly, but deeply. You begin to move with quiet certainty. You begin to live with intention. You begin to recognize that your worth was never something to earn, only something to remember. And from that place, you no longer chase what cannot see you. You no longer hold on to what does not respect you. You no longer explain your value to those who have already overlooked it. You simply become it. Calm, clear, unshaken. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. And in that change, one truth remains steady within you. You were never an option. You were always the choice.